Today on BRStv Investigates, we have the last episode of the Clown Harem Tank, a recipe for success, and then giving away Fang and Sir Chomsalot's harem at the end. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv Investigates Tank Trials, where we put reefing products, methods, and systems to the test, where we get to explore all kinds of methods of reefing, even create new ones, and then test them so we can all learn from those experiences before applying them to our home display tanks. In this case, the goal is a stable, healthy harem of clownfish. In today's episode, we'll talk why anyone would consider doing this, our experience so far, the recipe for doing it yourself, and then finish off with some deviations where someone might consider doing something a little bit different. To start this off, it's pretty interesting to see various reefers' reactions to this tank. Some shrug at it, and others think it's the coolest thing that they've seen. I can only speak for myself, but once you've produced multiple successful reef tanks, the tendency is to go down the bigger and better path, meaning larger tanks with ever more corals. Alternatively, many reefers take their hobby in a different path and try out new things such as species-specific tanks and sometimes more challenging tanks like NPS non-photosynthetic corals. It is a hobby, and for many of us, trying out new challenges is what makes it fun and engaging. I personally find the Clown Harem Tank to be one of my favorites just because you get to watch a very natural behavior and a whole community of fish evolve in front of your eyes. Many of the fish take on very distinct personalities. You also get to see how the fish interact with their habitat. In this case, the bubble tip anemones, but not just one, but how community fish interact with a larger array of habitat. Lastly, let's face it, our families and guests just like organisms that move and have personalities. Meaning it's fun to show off this type of tank, and visitors are always impressed. Really just a cool component of any living or office space. If done right, it's also one of the easiest complete tanks out there to take care of. So in many ways, I see this type of species-specific hierarchy tank as a progression of the hobby. That said, there's one big difference here. While there are a million ways to set up a reef tank and be successful, the Clown Harem tanks just do better long-term with a somewhat disciplined reefer who's willing to identify a plan then act on it. The plan doesn't have to be complicated or hard. In fact, it can be one of the easiest tank styles out there, but as you'll learn, consistency is the most important component of all of this. Okay, so it's been 4.5 years since we started this series in 2014. We didn't know it at the time, but the Clown Harem series was essentially our first tank trial. There was certainly a healthy amount of debate at the time if you could really house 30 or so clowns long-term in a fairly small tank like a 120. However, like most things in reefing, it's not that you can't do it, it's just more so how do you do it, and are you willing to emulate other successes, or are you a trailblazer always trying to find new ways? Both paths are important for the hobby, but it's important to be aware that the nature of emulating other successes means you'll also likely find success. The path of the trailblazer is about progress and attempting new things, but the nature of that means there'll often be many failures along the way before something new and replicable is identified. Sadly, in this case, failures often means mortality, so hopefully that's treated with that respect. In our case, we started with a wealth of research focused on emulating other successes, but I will say it all started with Mobert's thread on RC, 27 clowns in the same tank, 27 months, and reading all 36 pages. Yeah, it took some time to read all that, but a bit of effort up front avoids all kinds of challenges. Luckily for you, I think that you can condense everything that we learned from that, as well as our own experiences into this one video and save a ton of time. Overall, the road has been pretty smooth. The biggest challenge was certainly related to lighting, and the anemones and the rest of the challenges were really just related to any time that we changed something, the harem just didn't like it, and it shows up in aggression. But ultimately, the tank has thrived and been one of the easiest tanks the BRS team has ever maintained. Basically, feed it and do water changes, no additives, testing, or complicated chemistry. In fact, while this may be considered a progression of the hobby, I think a newer reefer who's willing to follow instructions could be more successful with this tank style than many others. Part of the reason that we're doing this update is we decided to take this tank down a few months ago and replace it with a new project. Some of you may already know that the new project is that new worldwide coral method tank for our lobby. In that spirit, we moved 6 of the harem clowns to the ULMs and then moved the rest of the other tanks throughout the office. Chad didn't have any space for some of the Fang and Sir Chomsalot's babies, so for the moment they're living in here. These are actually the fish that we're going to give away at the end of today's episode. Okay, so what's a recipe for success? Well, I think there are 4 elements: a tiny bit of system design, community management, a bit of maintenance, and resist changes. I'm not going to spend much time on system design or maintenance because it's really not much different than most tanks, and you can always go back to the previous episodes to see exactly how we set up these tanks. But I do have a few comments. All we have here is a standard system with a sump, skimmer, heater, and a couple power heads. The two MP40s we have here are turned down pretty darn low. The RBTAs just seem to like the lower end of flow. Some power heads may be a bit more anemone friendly than others, but none are perfect. My only real comment in relation to the tank is bigger is better. Giving the fish room to escape the inevitable squabbles is important. I guess a 60 cube is about the smallest that I would consider for something like this. I say a 2-foot cube because the clown's aggression bubble seems to be about a foot. So in a 2-foot 60-gallon cube, the less dominant members of the community can effectively escape when needed. If you do go smaller than that, put some real effort into the aquascape and create different zones in the tank where the fish can escape each other's aggression. The 120-gallon tank we used was nice, but if I had to do it over again, I would select a 93 cube, which is a 30-30 by 24. Even though it's smaller, I think that extra depth front to back would allow for a more diverse aquascape or habitat for this kind of thing, allowing some of the less dominant fish more places to escape aggression. Outside of that, you don't need super advanced lighting for this. I can tell you over the years, the RBTAs just seem to like the T5 lights much more than any other lighting solutions. I'll straight up say we struggled hard keeping the RBTAs happy with LEDs alone. If I tried that again, I'd personally mount the LEDs pretty high over the tank, and my preference would certainly be something that blends the individual spectrums well, like the dense matrix array on the Kessel or the diffuser on the Radions. Of all the options out there, I would personally select the Aquatic Life T5 LED hybrid for most tanks, and really the LED of your choice. It doesn't have to be super high powered. I just say hybrid because I really want that sense of movement and shimmer that comes with LEDs. I'd also cycle the tank normally. If you do get the harem as a clutch of small fish, it may seem foreign to add 30 or so fish at once, but they're tiny. A standard cycle followed by adding the fish, and then a bacterial booster like Dr. Tim's or Brightwell's Neobacter 7, and you'll probably have success. Okay, the biggest comment here is actually focusing on the community of fish itself. There's one defining characteristic between your standard reef tank and a harem tank. The strategy for a successful reef tank often revolves largely around chemistry and lighting. A harem tank is almost all about understanding and managing a community. Really doesn't matter if we're talking about fish, lions, or gorillas. The communities act pretty similar in relation to common aggressive natures and environmental stresses. If we treat the community with respect and solve the common stresses, we'll have success. So in this case, the first thing any community of fish, lions, or even humans for that matter will do is be aggressive about the availability of food. That is until it becomes obvious that food is not a finite resource. There's more than enough to go around, available at regular intervals, and just a waste of effort to protect it. So in that spirit, this is actually the easiest thing for us to solve. Just pick up an auto feeder which will dispense food regularly a few times a day, every day. With an adequate food supply delivered at regular, reliable intervals, food aggression within the community will be a complete non-issue. For that reason, an auto feeder can be one of the most valuable additions to a harem tank. An Aquatic Life or a Neptune feeder being the BRS favorites. A feeding ring is also helpful to make sure most of the food stays in the tank rather than going down the overflow. After food availability is solved, the community would likely begin to squabble over prime habitat. That is until they realize, well, there is some prime spots there. There's more than enough shelter to go around. When there is an abundance of good habitat, there's no reason to be aggressive about it. So in this case, effort put into proper aquascapes is important. Tunnels, overhangs, and islands which attempt to create separate habitats in a variety of areas in the tank is helpful, but most important is probably adding a bunch of anemones. I suggest bubble tips just because they're the easiest to be successful with, often the lowest cost, and replicate themselves. When I say a bunch, I mean like as many as possible. This isn't the cheapest component, but in most cases, I would be looking for 10 to 20 or even 30 of them. Cheapest way would be to ask some club members or ask the local store and tell them how many you want. They might be able to give you a good deal if you order in advance. In any case, if you provide ample, desirable habitat like this, the territorial aggression will be limited because most of them will be able to acquire appropriate habitat and stay away from the more aggressive members of the community. I'd actually say this is almost as valuable as the auto feeder. After you've provided ample food and shelter, then of course every community will fight over who's the leader. Often the most ambitious and physically impressive members of the community will squabble over who becomes a leader. The winner in most cases also serving as the primary breeder of the community. This is just something you need to let play itself out, but as long as you've provided at least that 2 feet of room to escape, ample food and habitat, the squabbles will be less aggressive in nature. Lastly, once everything is settled in the community and things are going well, some of the more aggressive members of that community will decide that they should pick on anyone who looks or behaves different from the rest. The best way to solve this is from the beginning. I know some of the reefers out there will have success mixing various clown types, but those that go with a single type will have a much higher success rate. Keep in mind that this is largely natural behavior for a single clown type to form its own community and not cohesively mingle with other types. So in that spirit, going with all the same type of clowns from a single clutch of eggs is the best thing that you can do to eliminate size, look, and behavior variances. Even in our case, there were some clowns that stood out from the rest, most notably one, which had an oranger face than the rest, and he was consistently picked on by the rest. We eventually had to remove him for his own safety. Really, any differences within the community will stand out, and why starting with all fish from the same clutch will have the best success rate. It's obviously not easy to find a clutch of clowns at any old fish store or even online store, so I thought I'd mention that Chad, our resident fish breeder here at BRS, does provide them on his website, Aquatics. I wouldn't be surprised if he was offering the offspring from the BRS160 or our harem tank, and even some hybrids in the not too distant future. Chad's a well-respected member of the breeding community, and I don't think that you could do much better than the personal service that you'll get from him. I'd also say that more is better as well in most cases. Having more clowns disperses the total aggression amongst more individuals. In our case, we went with 30 clowns in a 120, which overall seemed like a good number that we were successful with. I personally would not have gone with lower than 20 or higher than 40, so one every 3 to 6 gallons depending on the effort you put into the aquascape and habitat. That's really all there is to the recipe for success. Just respect that this is more than an aquarium you're caring for. The entire community of fish with a natural hierarchy and related patterns. Outside of that is maintenance. I gotta say that chemistry with this type of tank can be handled almost completely with water changes alone. That said, because there's a fairly heavy fish load and heavy feeding schedule in these types of tanks, nutrient export is a big thing. So maintaining your skimmer and water changes are a big deal. Automating those water changes with a Neptune dose like we've been talking about in other episodes would make it a lot easier to do and really make this tank almost one of the easiest to maintenance out there. You can also use a Fuge or algae scrubber for nutrient export as well as a mechanical filtration like filter socks. In fact, I think this might be an ideal application for something like the roller mat, which will automatically remove a pretty substantial amount of both uneaten food as well as fish waste before it has a chance to break down. In fact, when bioload and feeding are going to be high, I'd say frequent filter sock changes or automatic solutions like the roller mat may be one of the more valuable components of the filtration. Very possibly a solution that could cut your water change needs in half. In any case, I'd pick a solid water change schedule like 10 to 15% a week or more advanced other nutrient export methods. Okay, so the fourth and final element of all this is resist changes at all costs, meaning don't change your lights, don't change the flow, don't change the feeding patterns or types of food, and don't add more clowns. Without fail, every single change that we've made to the system has started an aggression cycle. It might not be apparent why more or less flow or lighting may make clowns aggressive against each other for a period of time, but again, I go back to trying to understand a community. If there's any major change to weather, food availability, color, intensity of the sun, or additional members added, it will be a disruptive experience to the hierarchy. Again, it doesn't matter if we're talking fish, lions, gorillas, or humans, the result is major environmental change is stress, and stress causes aggression, so limit the changes at all costs. I'd say specifically the timing and availability of food being the number one. So what if you do want to stray from the recipe here? Well, the most obvious is a mix of different clowns. It can be done, but understand that your success rates just went down. It'd be very wise to try and keep a single type like Percula or Ocellaris and then different color variations, but if all possible, very young juveniles and about the same size. It's also critical that you don't get, say, 20 of one color variation and 3 of the other, because the community will single out and harass those 3. It'd be better to get 10 of one color or pattern variations and 10 of another, or 777 of various different types. Mixing them like this will almost certainly work out for the first couple of years, but be prepared that as they become adults, the rate of success will definitely go down, meaning you may start losing some to aggression, which is pretty sad after you've cared for them for a couple of years. In the end, that just means if you want to have success with multiple colorations of clowns, just put more effort into the size of the tank, habitat, and food. In the end, success rates with just getting a group of very small clowns from all the same clutch is going to have significantly higher success rates. Same thing for anemones. You can use other anemones than BTAs. They just are often harder to care for, more expensive, and most don't commonly split or reproduce in an aquarium. That said, nothing wrong with trying them, but I would note that some produce chemical irritants to each other, so running activated carbon may be of significant value. So as you might guess, this week's Reef to Reef poll is, now that you know what's entailed, would you ever run a Clown Harem tank in your home or office? This is a pretty specific tank, so I won't be surprised if there are more no's than yeses, but I am pretty curious how many reefers out there are interested in this type of thing. For those of you that are interested, we're going to give away 2 sets or 20 or so clowns from Fang and Sir Chomsalat's babies. And for those of you that are interested even more, we're going to give away a badge to Barry Ronke's tank. He's got a reef-to-reef thread called Resistance is Futile, the 90-gallon Borg Cube, as well as a YouTube series called the 90-gallon Clown Harem, the Borg Build Series. Should be fun to watch Aaron's success here. If you want to win one of those 2 clutches, hit that link in the lower left and head on over to the site, click on specials and deals, and then free stuff to sign up. For those of you who are interested but don't win, again, take a look at Chad's site, VossenAquatics.com. Most are pretty reasonable deal, and I wouldn't be surprised if he adds some of those stars from our BRStv series in the near future. He's also an awesome resource for any questions that you might have about clowns and really breeding almost any type of fish. Okay, so I've been waiting for next week for a long time. This is going to be the launch of our Worldwide Corals BRS Hybrid series. We're going to dive deep into what's worked for them and then replicate it here with a brand new tank here in the BRS Lobby. This will almost certainly be the most valuable series that we've done to date and certainly the most fun to watch. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to be notified instantly when these episodes come out. See you next week with the first episode of that brand new series.